How you doing, guys? I hope all is well on this Sunday morning. If everybody is having a nice weekend. If you get out and done something, happy days. If you've done nothing but sit down, not even got dressed and ate cereal, that's completely fine too, because that's all allowable. I am feeling slightly ropey this morning because I decided to have a couple of pints last night and up talking shit on house parties for a couple of hours. But anyway, what we're going to do today is everybody's looking for mobility and flexibility ideas, so we're going to start off with a better place. Start off with the foot, okay? So your foot's very complex. So what you have to consider with the foot and everything is that what's its function. So its function of the foot is when you're walking, it hits the ground first, and the idea of the foot is to distribute load from this part of your foot up the entire body. All right. When you're running at different speeds, if that foot isn't strong enough to be able to accept the load and distribute it evenly, then that's when you run into problems. That's when you start to have a couple of different issues. Now, if you don't have good mobility or flexibility in your foot, other parts of your body are going to compensate. Now, nobody's foot is perfect. Everyone's is going to be different, and everybody's going to have different problems. But it's how the rest of that body is able to cope with the compensation. And the compensation is what mobility issues that you have and what point on that foot or what point in that leg is absorbing all the load as you run. I can do this all day, and I can strip down Olympic level athletes and find something wrong with them, so nobody is going to be perfect. But there's a couple of different things when you have to consider the foot, which are very, very important. And number one is, let's just look at this foot in the beginning, all right? So there's a lot of complex bones in it. It's a nice big structure that works in together. Right there's your big heel bone. And if you turn it around, I'm just not being very good at this now at the moment. And turn it around that way. Yeah, there we go. And then you can find that it is quite a complex structure. All right. Now, as I said, there's a couple of different points you need to look at here. And number one is here. And number two is here. All right. And that's your big toe and your arch, okay? Now, so what are these important? Now, what happens when you're running with your big toe is when that foot comes down, it plants onto the ground. And then this back of your heel lifts up, and then this toe has to kind of bend to allow movement. Now, if you don't have that movement in that foot, what's going to happen is this foot is going to roll down onto... sorry, it's my fault. It's going to roll down onto this side, and it's going to cause it to be quite irritable, okay? Or it's going to put more load on the inside of that leg. But what you have to consider with this is what happens at that part, but also what happens at this part. There also is a counter movement at this part. So if this foot rolls in and you got stressed on there, this is going to roll out, and muscles are going to tighten on this point, giving you pain on this side. So it's twofold, all right? So in order, let's say if I was treating somebody and they were kind of very, very tight and they were rolling in onto that side, the big toe wasn't loosening, what would I do? So you generally have to, number one, look at your big toe. Generally loosen up that mobility and see if you can kind of get that to work a little bit better. Then what you're going to try and do is you're going to try and strengthen up this arch so it's going to support itself. That whole foot's going to work when it's actually running. And what you're going to do on that side then, you're going to kind of look at this side. And you're going to look at all the muscles that are going to work here onto this position. And you're going to loosen out up down. So that foot's able to rock in and out and move nice and freely. Okay, so it's going to be able to accept the load, it's pliable, and it's able to distribute the load evenly up the leg. Alright. Right, we've kind of covered what happens on the foot on either side. And now we're kind of going to look at, so what kind of injuries can happen with this foot? So majority of the time is like people will come into our clinic because they haven't found relief or anywhere else. We kind of tend to look at things a little bit differently. So not only are we looking at the entire foot of what's actually happening down, let's say if somebody comes in with plantar fasciitis, which is kind of like an inflammation of a kind of tendon in the lower part of the bone. I'll just zoom in on this and just give you a little bit better look at it. Turn it upside down. So that is it there. All right. So that's your plantar fascia. All right. Now, what actually happens is when your foot actually is quite flat or one part of your foot is not working properly, what actually happens is this starts to get really, really annoyed because it's pulling on the bone, tendon starts to get inflamed because it's working really, really hard. And a lot of people just tend to kind of go and just look after the symptoms, right? Roll your foot or put some ice or take some anti-inflammatories and change your shoes and do some acupuncture and try and stretch out the foot a little bit more. But unfortunately, what you have to realise with this, it's not just the tendon that's annoyed, it's actually the strength of the foot that's pissing off the tendon. So you kind of, while the tendon and the pain is the symptom, you have to look for the cause of what it is. And 9 times out of 10, what we feel is the inside of that foot is going to roll in. You're going to be quite flat-footed. This big toe is not going to move. You're going to be quite tight on this side. And then if you actually zoom out of that foot, what's going to happen is that this leg is going to roll in on this side. You're going to be quite tight here and here. Oh, sorry, the two of them are going to go down. Sorry, that's the other way. They're going to be quite tight on this side. It's going to be quite tight there. And it's all going to tighten up together. And then as you go further up the leg, this leg is going to rotate in like that position. Then you go further up to your hip. Then that hip is going to rotate into that position. Put an awful lot of stretch on some of the other muscles that are going to be here in your hips. So I'm going to talk a lot about what your hips do. And we have a basis of that. You have a central pillar. So that's your hips, your core, your torso, and your shoulders. If you have any of them working really, really well, doing the basics really, really right, then you shouldn't have too many issues that should be hard solved anywhere else in your body. Okay. All right, so that's the foot. That's your plantar fascia pain on that side. What else do we got? What else have we kind of got in here? You have your usual ankle injuries. I'll just show you these ligaments here. Let's just remove that now for a second, and let's have a look in this ankle. So there's that ankle bone there. I will throw in a couple of muscles here and see what happens with this. All right, so that actually makes it a little bit more complex. Now I'll take that back out. So let's have a look. So there's there's one of those bigger. That's one of the bigger main ligaments that's in your ankle there. Now it's not showing all of them here now, this position, so I don't know why. But generally, when you invert or when you roll over that ankle, and everything kind of comes down into this position, like you roll over when you're playing football, you're going to stretch all those ligaments on that side of your foot, and then that's going to get really, really annoyed. But remember, when you there's cause and reaction. So what actually happens is that when you roll over on this ankle, you'll tear some ligaments around about here, but you'll also kind of smash a couple of ligaments together on this side and here. So some of the bones might come quite close to each other depending on the velocity of the impact that you actually have. All right, so that's your ankle injury on that side. And then what happens is that foot, to try and protect itself, it'll switch off a couple of muscles. You might end up with a little bit of flat foot. A lot of muscles will end up getting weaker. So yes, while giving the ligaments time to heal is good, you're never going to fully recover from it if you don't do some strengthening. And trust me, I've broken the same ankle 3 times. This shit does not work unless you go and strengthen it, okay? All right, so that's covering a couple of different injuries. Yeah, you have your Achilles one there in that position where that Achilles comes down. I'll just show you the muscles in this position. No, not those ones. So there's that big Achilles. That's it there, and see the way it comes down onto that position. And then you have a couple of the muscles that are quite important. One of these ones that attaches onto your toe flexor there, that supports the arch. And a lot of people don't think to kind of use those bigger muscles, but everything needs to work as a system to kind of support the leg. So yes, the foot bone's connected to the knee bone's connected to the hip bone, but all of this needs to work as a system to come together. And just as a good example of that is, there's your Achilles on one side. So as that is lengthening, what actually happens on the opposite side of it is this muscle is shortening, all right? And then what happens at the same time is when this muscle, there your peroneals on that side, what happens when this lengthens, then what actually happens is on this side shortens, and that's your tibialis posterior just there on. Let's see if we can get it in there on that side. Yeah, there you go. And then there's one of your toe flexors there on that side as well. Okay. All right. So you just have to consider how everything works as a system. Now I've set up something else here. Where are we gone to? All right. So here's your body, and this is how it works as a system and how it can affect the kinetic chain the whole way up. So if you see here, just down on that picture, down on the bottom right hand side, so it'll be the skeleton's left foot. That foot pronates in, all right? As a reaction of that, then you're going to get a little bit of stiffness in your knee as that lower part of that shin bone begins to rotate in. Your femur, then the bone above that's going to rotate in further, and you're going to drop down on one side of the pelvis. And this is why people think that you always like, oh, I have one hip out, one hip is out and the other, or pelvis is lower, my pelvis is out of place, or one leg is longer than the other. Most of that is a load of horse shit, to be honest. It's all got to go down to what muscles are happening and where in the kinetic chain is able to support itself properly. Yes, we can do some manipulations, but manipulation is not actually putting your bones back into place. It's actually a buildup of gas in the joint that when we get it into a certain position, that swelling, kind of think of it like a swelling, so like a balloon. So if you put a balloon inside the joint's going to feel tight and stiff. Next thing we get that joint into in the extreme end of ranges and apply a thrust to it, that balloon's going to pop, and then you start to feel, oh, nice and released. So it's not actually the bone clicking back into place, it's actually just a little bit of gas popping, and then that's why you feel so relaxed after, because that nervous system has got a chance to kind of contract and kind of go, oh, geez, I feel way looser than before. But the looseness that you feel after manipulation is down to you not being aware of what a normal stiffness is. All right, so as you can see, that pelvis drops on that side, and then it can affect your shoulder up in this position, and all those different muscles have to counteract these movements in your body to maintain you walking in a good position. All right, so let's go moving on onto other ones here. So these are your fascial lines, and these are how the muscles interact with each other. So let's say down on the foot on this one on the right hand side, and you're getting shin splints down onto the inside of that left foot. What we're going to do is we're going to write what's happening with that shin splints. If you look back in here, the bones are moving in on the left-hand side, or the left-hand side of that skeleton, or the skeleton's left foot, the right-hand side of the skeleton as you're looking at it. And then what you're going to figure out is what are the muscles doing to counteract that. Now, if we go down, we're going to look into that hip quite an awful lot to try and release muscles there in order to make an effect down on the shin splints down on the inside of the leg, because all of that line is going to be quite tight and quite tension. Oh, what's after happening here now? Let's see. All right, so we got it there. Now, with your foot, you can kind of look at the superficial back line there on the left-hand side, where those muscles in the bottom part of the foot track the whole way up through the calf, hamstring, into your lower back, and then straight back up into your head. Now, I'm going to show you one or two exercises that if you release the foot, you're going to feel looser in your hamstring, your calf, your back, and maybe even your neck, just depending on what's actually happening with you. And that's how we kind of look at. These are called fascial lines. They're designed by Tom Myers, which is a book called Anatomy Trained. Very, very interesting for any students that want to figure out how your body is working as one system and how it interacts with it. Fascia is basically a tissue. It's like, I describe it as kind of cling film over the muscles. So let's say you wrap your entire leg in cling film, and you pull on that cling film down on your ankle, you're going to feel that tug up and around the top of your leg as well, because it all interacts as one. And what happens is those fascial lines have a higher level of nerve endings, so your body is actually more aware of them. So let's say your muscle has a neural connection. There's 100 neural connections from one muscle to your brain. The fascia has a lot more. That could be up into the thousands, just depending on what structure and what tissue you're looking at. All right, so how actually happens this when you're running? So if your foot is not strong enough, now just look down the bottom right hand side of the screen. The left hand side is a good foot that's working quite nicely. You don't see any overactivity in that muscle there on the left hand side of the leg, because he has a nice good angle. The foot's nice and strong, it's able to accept the load, muscles aren't working too hard. Now see what happens on the right hand side of that. So that degree is 167. That ankle kind of rolls in a little bit too much. I've seen an awful lot worse, but it's still 20 degrees less than what the other side is. But then if you look up the calf, that muscle on the outside of that calf is starting to work really, really hard, and the outside of that hamstring is probably starting to pull on that as well, because the hamstring comes down over the back of the knee joint. So you're kind of figuring out that this muscle is working harder to try and stabilize that foot, because it's rolling into this side, rolling onto the inside, because the inside of that foot is not strong enough to accept the load. And that's what I'm trying to get at, is you look at the foot, but you have to consider other considerations what's happening. A lot of people will go to physios, they'll get a good bit of relief off doing some exercises, they concentrate on that area. But if you're not addressing the biomechanical faults further up the kinetic chain, then you're not going to get long-lasting relief. And 6 weeks later, you're like, fuck yeah, he was useless. I'm never going back to him again. I spent 300 euros with him. Sometimes that can be down to the patient's fault, not giving it a little bit more time. That's got to be fair with this. Like, they kind of want to just get out. Some people just want to get out of pain. That's it. Be done. Other people want to get out of pain and actually do the rehab. But if you want to get long-lasting results, then it's up to the physio's responsibility to actually explain to you that in order to get that, you have to put in more time with it. And you have a lot of people kind of come back in and saying that, oh, I had an ankle injury and it just never got right after that. It's never got right because sometimes you didn't really do the right strengthening. You didn't address the other kinetic factors that are further up your body, or you didn't. You just actually didn't bother your arse to do the rehab. One or the other. Let's be honest with it, okay? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to